Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I had a viewer request to talk about healing in D&D, and this is not my area of expertise, but I'm going to share what wisdom I might have to impart. Now, when we talk about healing, we need to differentiate healing inside and outside of combat. Like if I'm using Aura Vitality to do some healing, I should expect about 70 points of healing total from this one third level spell, and that's pretty good. However, let's say you're in a combat and taking lots of damage, and some healing could come in really handy. Let's say we're in round 3 of a 6-round tough combat. So you cast your Aura Vitality. Well, you're only healing an average of 7 points on round 3, and maybe 28 points average before the fight is over, and you're concentrating to get that for 4 rounds, assuming you maintain your concentration, which isn't a sure thing. So, although I consider Aura Vitality to be a good healing spell, I wouldn't consider it a good in-combat healing spell. And in the optimization community, we tend to talk almost exclusively about out-of-combat healing, because in-combat healing tends not to be so great. This is a topic I've certainly talked about before. Here's an example. The mechanics of the game make preventing damage more efficient than healing damage after the fact. That's not to say a well-placed healing word doesn't have its place in combat. You know, sometimes I say or write things that I meant to be taken as a generality, but somehow they end up warping into absolutes. And this is one such quote. So let me demonstrate the generality. So you're a 5th level cleric and have taken the iconic Cure Wounds spell. I'm not sure I'd call this a great spell, but it's definitely iconic. So, you and your party are fighting a Bulette. This is a challenge rating 5 creature. Wouldn't really be a challenge on its own for a 5th level party. But maybe there's multiple Bulettes. But this Bulette got lucky and scored a critical hit on our fighter. So its base damage is 4d12 plus 4, so that's 8d12 plus 4 on a critical hit. That works out to an expected damage of 56. Our 5th level fighter is working off d10s for hit points, so that's 34 base. Then, let's say they have a constitution of 16, which would add another 3 hit points per level. So this level 5 fighter has a total of 49 hit points. Or they had a total of 49, because now with a single critical hit from a challenge rating 5 creature, they're down to 0. But that's okay, because we have a cleric in the party, so on your turn you move up to the paladin and you cast Cure Wounds. And why hold back? We'll cast it at 3rd level, doing the maximum amount of healing possible. Let's say we have a plus 3 wisdom modifier, so that's 3d8 plus 3 healing with this 3rd level spell. The fighter's back up with, on average, about 17 hit points. Well, let's look at this Bulette again. Its bite does an average of 30 points on a hit. That's almost double what we just restored our fighter to. One more hit, and the fighter goes right back down. If you think about it, it would make no difference if we healed the fighter those 17 hit points or to cast a 1st level healing word for 5 or 6 points. The result is essentially the same. The fighter is up until they get hit again, at which point they're going to go right back down. And we spent our whole turn and a 3rd level spell slot, and that could be a Revivify spell, which we might need if this Bulette keeps scoring these criticals. But let's say we really focused on healing, so we decided to play a Life Cleric. So Disciple of Life would have added another 5 hit points of healing to that 3rd level Cure Wounds. So that would bring the fighter up to 22 hit points. Well, 30 hit points on average, it's going to be the same thing. One more hit, and in all likelihood, they go right back down the same as if we had healed them a single hit point. Well, we're a Life Cleric, so what about Preserve Life? Well, that heals 5 times our Cleric level, and we're level 5. So that's 25 hit points. So we bring the fighter back up to 25, and guess what? Yeah, 1 hit more and they go right back down. Makes no difference whatsoever. Okay, but let's say we had cast a 1st level Sanctuary spell on the fighter before the Bulette attacked. Maybe the fighter was exploring a bit ahead of the rest of the party, and we knew a Bulette was under there somewhere, so we had forethought to cast a spell as they moved up ahead. Well, now when the Bulette bursts up from the ground and attacks the fighter, it must make a wisdom saving throw against our spell DC of 14. With a +0 to its saving throw, it's likely going to fail, at which point it must choose a different target, and if there's none in range, it's just going to lose its attack and action. Now the fighter has all 49 hit points full up, and that just cost us one first level spell. This is what I mean by preventing damage is more efficient than healing it after the fact. And it did not need to be Sanctuary. A Warding Bond would have prevented the fighter from going down. Or maybe the wizard beat the Bulette's initiative and cast Levitate on the fighter, so he's out of the Bulette's reach and not detectable with Tremor Sense. Or maybe they cast Silvery Barbs and the Bulette has to re-roll the attack, making it possible they might miss altogether, not just negate that critical hit. Or someone had cast Tasha's Mind Whip on the Bulette, or Vortex Warp on the fighter. There are so many options to keep that fighter from going down in the first place, using fewer or smaller resources than a third level Cure Wounds spell. I've also said, and this is something you'll hear from a lot of optimizers, is a dedicated healing character is not very good. That's partially because of what we just discussed. In-combat healing isn't particularly effective, beyond little heals like Healing Word when somebody drops to 0 hit points, but it's also because if the dedicated healer's turn comes up and nobody needs healing, and that happens a lot, especially in the first round of a combat, which, by the way, is the most important round, generally speaking, then what exactly are you supposed to be doing? Like, how are you contributing? You don't want to use resources that could later be applied to healing, so do what? A cantrip? So we end up with two issues. Healing is not as efficient as preventing damage, and it's also not something consistently needed, even if it was. And all this information I've just covered, I've said a number of times before, though never in a dedicated video because I've never really deep dived into this subject. So that out of the way, let me circle back to something I said at the start of this video. Sometimes I say something that's meant to be a generality, but it gets taken as an absolute. So generally speaking, in-combat healing just doesn't keep up with the damage our characters are taking. So it's efficient to do other things with our actions and bonus actions and resources, since a character with 1 hit point is no more hindered on actions than a character with full hit points. If someone goes down, you don't need to heal them that much. I mean, even a single hit point will usually do the trick. But there are exceptions. So let's look at some exceptions to the rule. So back to our hypothetical scenario, and our fighter just took the critical hit from the Bulette. So should we just cast Healing Word on the unconscious fighter since there's no real point in healing them any more than that? I would say most of the time a Healing Word or similar low-cost heal is the right move. Again, most of the time, because let's consider some nuances. First off, the Bulette does an average of 30 damage with its main attack, so if we can heal more hit points than the Bulette will deal with an attack, then the fighter would stay up. So that might be worth it. Secondly, are we just fighting a Bulette at 5th level? That's not a hard fight. We could just get the fighter out of range, unconscious or not, stick the Bulette in a web or something, and just eviscerate it. Or is this a hard fight? Because if it is, we may need that fighter up and contributing. Maybe they go right after us in initiative and can enhance our healing with Second Wind. Then restrict the positioning of the enemy with a menacing attack or something. Thirdly, what if we heal the fighter with a Healing Word, so they're up to, say, 6 hit points, and then the Bulette scores another critical hit. When damage reduces you to 0 hit points and there is damage remaining, you die if the remaining damage equals or exceeds your hit point maximum. With an average damage roll, that fighter just died. If we had healed more than 7 hit points, they would have survived. That's literally the difference between a first level Healing Word and a first level Cure Wounds. Of course, you don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know either. Also, we can talk all we want about average damage or average amount healed, but we all know the dice don't always roll the average. So there's not just math involved, there's a whole lot of luck involved. But let's consider a build where in-combat healing is part of the strategy. I talked about Life Cleric briefly, which is healing centered, but you know what? We can do better than that. I do stand by my position that if you make a character totally built around healing and nothing else, that is not optimal. But you can build a character that's partially built around healing, and that could come in very handy indeed. Now, 5th level, you have limited options. But let's say we've gained a couple levels. Do we take 2 more levels in Cleric? I mean, maybe. But Druid is a pretty easy multiclass. So let's say Cleric 5, Druid 2. The nice thing here is we can use this multiclass to heavily advance our healing ability, and our spell slot advancement is not affected. And we don't need to be too careful with our ability scores to qualify for the multiclass. So let's start with Circle of Stars. So we're a 5th level Life Cleric, 2nd level Stars Druid. We can use Starry Form for a 10-minute period twice between every short rest. So look at the Chalice option. It says whenever we cast a spell using a spell slot that restores hit points, we can also restore a d8 plus our Wisdom modifier hit points to ourselves or another creature within 30 feet. So let's just consider this character for a moment. What do we do on round 1 of a big combat? I mean, probably not healing. I mean, unless it's been a really bad round 1. We're probably, casting Spirit Guardians. Then we have a bonus action, so we might as well set up Starry Form. Now we're in combat, and what do? I mean, this doesn't get said enough probably, but if you're a cleric and tearing up enemies with Spirit Guardians, you might want to consider dodging with your action. It's a good bet you're a primary target for your enemies, you should have a pretty decent armor class, and dodging isn't a limited resource. So what are you doing with your bonus action? Well, one possibility is using something like the telekinetic feat to attempt to pull somebody into your Spirit Guardians. If you just move up to them, well, they will take damage at the start of their turn, but if you pull them in, then they actually take damage twice. Once when you pull them in, and again at the start of their turn. So that can be nice, though you do need the telekinetic feat. But generally speaking, and again generally, you won't have to do that. So you could also dodge in Healing Word. That would be about 6 points from Healing Word, 9 if we're a Life Cleric, and if we have the Chalice Starry Form, that's another 8, which we can either give to the target of the Healing Word, as long as they're within 30 feet. So that's 17 total, or split up the healing. I mean, maybe we have multiple allies down. And we're just expending a bonus action and a 1st level spell, so this is a low resource cost. That could be a better option than maybe doing Spirit Guardians damage one more time to one opponent. I mean, think about it this way. If it is a 3rd level Spirit Guardians, that's 3d8 damage, or about 14 points of damage, but it's actually not that much, because maybe they make their saving throw against Spirit Guardians, so it's probably more like 11 points. But not even that much, because maybe they make the saving throw against Telekinetic Shove, in which case nothing happens. So the average damage of that strategy is probably closer to 6. Giving up about 6 points of damage in a 1st level spell slot for 17 points of healing is often going to be a great trade, even if we're just healing allies who aren't at 0 hit points. Now you do have to keep in mind we're talking about casting a bonus action spell, and that's not a problem if we're combining it with the dodge action, but if we want to cast, say, Dispel Magic or something with our action, then we're locked out of casting a bonus action spell. So, I mean, it's a complicated decision, and there's no right answer 100% of the time. All you can really do is create that option for yourself, and then when your turn comes up, or preferably, while you're waiting for your turn to come up, that's not as much an optimization tip as much as a D&D player tip. I mean, the less time you spend after your turn comes up deciding what to do, the more the rest of the table will appreciate it. Actually, it's the opposite, isn't it? The longer you take to decide what to do, the more the rest of your table will be getting fed up with you. Anyways, consider your options. Is Dispel Magic plus Telekinetic Pull the right move? Is Dodge and Healing and expending that spell slot the right move? There are so many considerations and possible circumstances, I can't cover them, or even guess what they all are. All I can do is tell you that in this situation, healing probably recovers twice or more as many hit points as telekinetically pulling inflicts. And that is a factor you should consider. Doing that telekinetic pull when you've got a 3rd level Spirit Guardians is generally going to inflict, on average, about 6 points of damage. If the enemy has a good strength save, that's going to be lower. If it has a poor save, that will be higher. If we upcast, we're getting approximately 2 more damage per spell level. Vulnerabilities and resistance to radiant damage aren't all that common, but they aren't unheard of, so that can be a factor. How close is the enemy to going down? That could be a factor. Do you need the 2 instances of damage to drop them? If so, that is an important consideration. Also, Healing Word is a solid spell and works particularly well with this specific build. But let's consider the other healing options. Circle of Dreams has Balm of the Summer Court and Healing Light of the Celestial Warlock. Those are both very similar features. Each give you d6s you can use to heal creatures at range with a bonus action. In the case of the Druid, it's 1 die per level, and the targets also get 1 temporary hit point per die. With the Warlock, there's no temporary hit points, but they get 1 additional d6 to spend. In either case, we're talking about 4 points of healing per level, per long rest, or thereabouts. So, a 10th level character could roughly heal about 40 hit points, maybe in 2 bursts of 20. I mean, that's not a lot of healing, but if your bonus action is free, it is more than nothing. Speaking of druids, the Circle of the Shepherd gets Spirit Totem. This is usable once per short or long rest, requires a bonus action, lasts a minute, and creates a 30-foot aura. If you choose the Unicorn Spirit, if you cast a spell that restores hit points to any creature inside or outside the area, each creature of your choice in the aura also regains hit points equal to your druid level. Now this one doesn't work as well with multiclassing as the Stars Druid does, but if you are playing a straight druid, this can be a lot of healing. Every paladin gets Lay on Hands. This can be used to neutralize poison and cure diseases, but as a straight healing option, it's actually quite good because it's flexible, and secondly, it scales well. So you get a pool of 5 points of healing per paladin level. So at level 1, you can use this 5 times to bring up 5 allies who've dropped to 0 hit points, or the same ally that went down 5 times. Where it starts to become more viable as an option for healing a non-unconscious ally is actually at higher levels. A 10th level paladin can heal 50 hit points in one shot. That's more than a cleric can heal at that level. The thing to consider here is the action economy, because you know the paladin has other options for their action. But if it gets an ally 2 additional rounds of combat without going down, that's probably a good trade-off. Of course, if you use the entire pool in one big shot, well then that's it until your next long rest. What I'll sometimes do is I'll use the whole pool minus 1 point for that emergency 1 point heal option. Grave Domain clerics can maximize their spell healing, so they get the maximum result on every die right from level 1. The issue is the target needs to be at 0 hit points when the spell is cast to gain the benefit. So you're still talking about waiting until someone goes down. And you need to consider how much damage they're going to be taking afterwards, because if they're going to go down in 1 hit, then maximization didn't really do anything. So here's what you need to do. If someone is at 0 hit points, if they're going down again on the next hit, you are probably better off with a first level healing word unless they are at risk of death due to massive damage. If you actually want to keep them up, consider the damage they're likely going to take. Then you got to do some math. A Cure Wounds heals 8 plus your Wisdom modifier plus 8 more per spell level if you are a Grave Domain cleric casting it on somebody with 0 hit points. Speaking of spells, talked about Healing Word and Cure Wounds. I think those are the most well known of the healing spells. But Aid is a healing spell, kinda. I mean, it doesn't technically restore hit points, but it increases a target's current hit points by 5. So in practice, it's basically the same thing, and it also increases the maximum hit points by the same amount. Aid has a 30-foot range, affects 3 targets, and the amounts added increase by 5 per spell level. So a 3rd level Aid spell is providing 30 hit points of healing. It just needs to be spread out. If multiple allies have dropped to 0 hit points, Aid is a good option to bring them all back up. Mass Healing Word heals up to 6 creatures, a d4 plus your spellcasting modifier. At its base level, it's probably healing a bit more damage total than an Aid spell would provide in hit points, about 39 compared to 30, assuming you have 6 allies needing healing at the same time. The advantages of Mass Healing Word is the 60-foot range is pretty good, and it's a bonus action to cast. For single target healing though, this is no better than the first level Healing Word spell, except it's a higher level spell and spell slot. Mass Cure Wounds is a little more effective. It heals up to 6 creatures in a 30-foot radius sphere you center up to 60 feet away from yourself. It's healing 3d8 plus your spellcasting modifier. So I would expect about 14 points of damage healed per target. If you actually heal 6 allies, that could be a little over 80 hit points. This is the kind of spell that works well with something like the Life Cleric as well. A 5th level aid is closer to 60 hit points, but again, the healing is more spread out. Increasing the spell slot level adds another d8 per slot level per target. Heal targets a single creature within 60 feet, and they regain 70 hit points. It also removes blindness, deafness, and disease, but it's mainly about the healing the hit points. Each spell slot level above 6 adds another 10 healing. This is by far the most dramatic single target healing spell you can get before 9th level spells are available. If you consider a Cure Wounds cast with 6th level, that's about 32 points of healing, less than half as much. Even if you can maximize the dice, it's still only 53 points. Life Transference is a bit different, partially because the spell is available to wizards, but also because the caster takes damage. So the caster takes 48 necrotic damage, and an ally within 30 feet recovers twice that much. So with 48, I would expect about 18 points of damage and about 36 points of healing. The damage sucks, of course, but 36 points of healing to a single target is a lot for a 3rd level spell. In fact, it is unmatched. With scaling, the damage increases by a d8 per spell slot level, which means the healing increases by twice that amount per spell level. If we're to compare this to the heal spell, if we were to cast this at 6th level, that would be 7d8 damage, or about 32, meaning it would heal about 64. Not quite a heal spell, but it's in that ballpark. There's some nice synergy with Life Transference and Life Cleric because your 1st level feature adds 5 points to the healing, and their 6th level feature mitigates 5 points of the damage. Technically, there's even some synergy with the Evocation Wizard. At 14th level, they can overchannel Life Transference if they cast it at 5th level or below. So a 5th level Life Transference could be maximized to deal 48 damage and heal 96 damage. That is more than a heal spell. Might not want to do that if you're concentrating on a spell, because that would be a DC 24 concentration save. Power Word Heal. Now we're into the big boys. So, 9th level healing spells. Power Word Heal is a bard spell with a range of touch that heals all the hit points to a single target. It also ends the charmed, frightened, paralyzed, or stunned conditions, and lets a prone creature use its reaction to stand up. If we're talking about single target healing, restoring 100% of lost hit points is going to be as good as it gets. Though this isn't the best 9th level healing spell, and even a bard might consider using magical secrets for the other option, because Mass Heal is the most powerful healing spell in the game. This is only on the Cleric spell list. This heals up to 700 hit points. Yeah, 700 hit points worth of damage, divided however you like among any number of allies within 60 feet. So unless that Power Word Heal is cast on a creature with more than a 700 hit point maximum, Mass Heal just heals more, very possibly taking a very injured crew and bringing everyone back to full hit points. This also removes diseases as well as the blinded or deafened condition, but let's be serious, it is all about the 700 hit points. Now, the thing about healing in combat is it should be apparent that it doesn't only have limitations and challenges, but it can also be extremely resource heavy. I spoke a bit earlier about mitigating damage, and the more damage you mitigate, the less you will have to heal, and the fewer resources you will need to expend. But I should also talk about temporary hit points. Any damage that expends temporary hit points doesn't need to be healed in the first place. Now, there are countless ways in the game to receive and provide temporary hit points, but there are 2 ways that really stand out. The first is the Twilight Cleric's Twilight Sanctuary, which grants a d6 plus your Cleric level in temporary hit points to every creature you want that ends its turn within 30 feet of you for a minute. The amount of potential temporary hit points this could provide is off the charts. The other is the Protector Cannon of the 3rd level Artillerist Artificer. With a bonus action on your turn, the cannon provides a d8 plus your intelligence modifier temporary hit points to all friendly creatures within 10 feet. This lacks the scaling of the Twilight Sanctuary feature, but minus the Twilight Domain, this is the most effective way to continually provide temporary hit points to several allies as well as yourself. Finally, remember that if someone is heavily wounded, healing them might not be your only option to keep them up. You could polymorph them into a giant ape, now they have 157 hit points, or teleport them out of danger, or maybe even an invisibility or greater invisibility spell will keep them up. But if you've watched my videos or read my guides and came to the conclusion that if someone isn't already at 0 hit points, you shouldn't ever bother healing them or consider any form of healing beyond out of combat healing, I'm hoping this video clears up that, in general, that actually still remains my advice. But it does have exceptions. So, all that said, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.